sharing my screen already? Yep, fantastic. All right. Welcome, folks. Thank you to our webinar on benefits and value management. I'm going to start by covering a couple of definitions. Then I'm going to do a bit of a case study. And the case study really highlights a lot of the things that we see as organizational challenges when people talking about benefits and value management. And then at the end of the session, time permit, I'll open it up to you guys, because I'm always really keen to hear about what other people's thoughts and challenges are around benefits. So first off, what do we mean when we talk about benefits management? So what we're really talking about is as it said on the slide, the measurable improvement from change, which is perceived as positive by one or more stakeholders and which contributes to the organizational objectives. I really like the APM definition of benefits because it is one of the most concise out there. There are many, many definitions of benefits management, some of which go for many pages, or many paragraphs at least. But the APM keep it nice and simple. They say that benefits realization management is the process of ensuring that benefits are derived from outputs and outcomes. Starts with the identification of benefits at the outset of a program or project and carries through to the delivery and review of benefits after the change has been implemented. Really sharp, crisp, and best of all, short. I want to talk about value as well, because I don't know about you guys, but we've seen, particularly over the last 12, 18 months, the term value creep in to a lot of benefits conversations with our customers. And one of the best resources I've seen in a really long time actually is called the Teal Book, which has come out of the UK Government Project Delivery Department. There are different definitions of value, and there is a Value Management Institute. But in our context, I think the Teal Book is probably my preferential resource. And they say that value is created when the positive impacts resulting from change are realized and sustained. In other words, value emerges only when benefits are converted into outcomes. And I like to think of that as meaning, well, the benefits might be the ingredients, but the value is the meal. And the UK government usually come out with this kind of stuff when things have failed. So I don't know the backgrounds, despite the accent, I'm a long time out of the UK. But the UK government have a history of whenever they do something poorly, they get a team of experts together and they produce a publication. That's where the very first version of Prince 2 came from, and probably its predecessors as well. And I know the UK government have had a tough time with projects and programs such as HS2, the high-speed rail. And I feel like this is some of those kind of struggling initiatives is probably where this Teal Book has come from. It's quite a new resource. It was first launched a version of it was first published in mid-2024, and the publication date on the actual book is, I think, 1st of April 2025. So it's available free, actually. We might have a link for you at the back of the pack, but it's an excellent resource. And if value is a topic of conversation in your organization, the Teal Book is a good resource. Unfortunately, one of the things that we're seeing in practice is that the term value is substituted for benefits. So not always do people understand the nuance and the difference between them. It's just this year's phrase, unfortunately, sometimes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. So why is benefits such a challenge to so many organizations? Well, they are often very poorly defined. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my case study. They're often, if they are defined at the beginning, and any changes to scope or change requests, change control, even if they're formal, and I'm not even thinking about scope creep, even formal changes to scope are often not assessed in line with the impact to benefits. Non-tangible benefits can be hard to define and quantify. And my personal view on this is that if you can't define it, it shouldn't be in the business case. It should be measurable. But there's no question that non-tangible benefits can be difficult to define. And we see in business cases a lot of motherhood statements, a lot of good intentions, but things that can't actually be stripped back to measurable benefits. And probably the number one most difficult thing about benefits is, even if we do a good job as project management professionals, even if our strategy team or our asset management team do a great job with the business case, once that project is finished and those benefits are handed over, sometimes ownership of benefits is confused and gets lost and can be very difficult to track. So I think most of those things will come up in our case study, but I think they're important to call out because we see them across industry, across customers, even in reasonably mature organizations, we see a lot of these symptoms around benefits. I should have said before, I think I did say, I will open up at the end. If you have any questions as I go through, drop them into the chat. Daniela will interrupt me if it's a pertinent question for now, and if it's not, we'll deal with it at the end of the session. So the case study I want to talk about today is a long-term customer of ours. We've been involved with them in various capacities for about the last 5 years. They're a large manufacturing business with operations right across Australia and New Zealand. And this case study really highlights some of the things that I've touched on already. And I'm hoping that they'll give you some ideas, if you're in the benefit space, of things that you can do to practically steer the ship through this minefield of benefits. So our original engagement was to support the organisation with an EPMO uplift, essentially moving from a very straightforward standard delivery PMO to a more strategic EPMO function. So we provided, there was quite a long kind of start off to this engagement. We provided some resources initially to bring some extra capability into the team, and then they started to benefiting from that capability, started to firm up what they wanted around a more strategic EPMO function. So we put in there a head of EPMO, we put in a benefits manager. We were working alongside them, really. We didn't have the whole EPMO as a managed service like we do in some situations, but we were augmenting their team and supporting them while they brought in a permanent team. So they weren't, the whole EPMO team weren't pledged people, but we had a few key roles that were ours. And really the idea, as I said, originally it was capacity. And as time went on, they really appreciated that extra capability as well. And we wanted to get them started quickly. So the main driver for this movement from a standard kind of mostly administrative PMO, if I'm honest, to a more strategic function was that the exec team were starting to become alarmed about the amount of projects that were spending budget. Oh, I've lost my share. Oh, yeah, it's just dropped off. There we go. My bad. Yeah, they were spending budget, but not delivering the entire scope. And that happened a few times. And then over a period of maybe a year or so, it started to become more the norm than the exception. And so projects were being completed, at least in terms of budget, but only partial scope delivered, only partial value, only partial benefits. And what they started to do is they'd introduce what we called the son of project. So it might have been, Project A, which was to deliver an ERP system. Some of the ERP system was delivered, but the last module or two that wasn't completed, we'd start Project B for that. And it was funded, given a new budget and a new kind of criteria of success. And so whilst the exec team kind of were happy to go along in the early days of this, it started to become a habit. And a couple of key, the CFO and the COO in particular, who were probably the most mature leaders in terms of project background, started to say, no, this isn't okay. This is becoming a norm. So there was a feeling from the leadership team generally, and with the flag raised by these two guys, that a lot of money was being spent, but there was a big question mark on how much value they were getting. They didn't know if they were actually getting value for what they were spending. So the exec team asked us to come in and discuss how they could get more clarity and focus about how this situation has arisen, and was this having an effect on benefits? Were they getting what they thought they were getting for their money over time? And they really wanted, we got into some of these quite deep conversations after initially just being engaged to talk about, let's take our PMO maturity up the scale. What the executive team actually really wanted was they wanted a conversation about value. If an EPMO creates the value, all well and good, but that's not why they want, that's not, they didn't want an EPMO for its own sake. They wanted to change the conversation between being purely about budget, time, cost, scope, risk, all important, but they wanted to change the language to value, benefits, outcomes. And so we were happy to hear them say that, and really reframed, I guess, the approach to the engagement. So what did we do? So some key things that we do in a situation like that. First of all, we sat down with the exec team. Let's get the people around the table who really matter. Now, that's an easy thing to say, but what we didn't realize at the beginning was there was so many key stakeholders that weren't being currently engaged with the process. So the leadership team are an obvious one. The project management community were an obvious one. But we didn't really understand how engaged the strategy team were up front with the process, but there was a disconnect between strategy and delivery. So we got all of those players around the table, and that was the first time that they'd actually sat together in a joined up way. I think the other headline that I'd give you was that inform and educate is not a one-off stop. It's an ongoing process that continues in this organization today. When you want cultural change, you can't just pop in a new process or a new template. The why has to be continually there underpinning what you do. And touched on it with the first one, really. This is a holistic approach. Benefits is not the problem of the strategy team or the leadership team or the delivery team. It's everybody's problem. And so reframing that up front was a really important thing. So we didn't just reframe it once, by the way. All of these things were continuing as we went through the engagement. And as I say, to some degree, even still today. Have I missed the slide? Yeah, please. Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm going to have to go into the chat and read it. Chat. Yeah, here it is. How do you get business to think differently and define benefits where it's a requirement from mandatory regulatory authority? Seems no questions often lead to loss of work, lots of outcome. As I say, it's a cultural change piece, and it has to start at the top. And then from the top, it goes to the people who are writing the business cases. I think for me, having a mandatory regulatory reason to do it is really very helpful, actually, rather than being a hindrance. It can underpin why we need to do this. So I think a regulatory requirement can be a huge help. But having said that, it's never an easy one. It has to be cultural change, and it has to start from the top. It has to be reinforced at the bottom, and it has to come together in the middle. That certainly would be our approach in every engagement around benefits. So I feel like I've lost a slide here. Sorry, hang on a sec. Oh. No, maybe I haven't. So I say we sat around the table with the strategy team, the delivery team, the leadership team, and we had to talk about that process around writing business cases. And that first conversation was an absolute revelation to some of the people in that room. The strategy team, very smart people, like most strategy teams, really understood about benefits conceptually, but had never really thought about the delivery process and how the way those benefits were written and articulated mattered for delivery and, importantly, measurement of delivery. So we really talked a lot about what that process was through delivery. We talked about the importance of the business case and not writing in motherhood statements and some of those metrics. Now, what we also did is that was a kind of kickoff meeting. From then onwards, whenever a project was initiated and the business case was written, they always had a delivery person in that process, and so that was probably one of the biggest contributors to improved business cases. That didn't change anything quickly because, you know, you've got a whole portfolio of business cases that were written 2 or 3 years ago, but they've since started to have those new business cases flowing through, and they are much better, much clearer, much more quantifiable, which means you can now answer the question, are we getting value for money or not? But for a while there, they were in a tunnel where they actually, even if the project was being delivered on time, it was very difficult to see, you know, what was the point of the project? What was the project trying to do in any real detail? So we sat down and we talked through those processes. We also talked through the processes as a whole team about how do we know if we're on track? What is the stage gate process? How does change factor into that stage gate process? Again, they hadn't been amazing at managing or controlling changes to scope. There's been some of the work was done in quite an agile way. It's not an agile environment by any stretch of the imagination, but they did work in sprints. They did have some iterative processes, but like in so many organizations, rather than go back and say, you know, we were asked to deliver an apple and now we've been asked for an orange, they just kept going and said, oh, it's still fruit, we're agile, we're not going to worry about it. Now that's okay in some cases, but if you've been asked to deliver an apple and you end up delivering an ice cream, that can be a problem. So we talked about fit for purpose scope management. If changes are small, if it's a fairly small, low risk, and the process is truly an agile one, then let's not worry about it. But if it's a significant change, if it's going to impact on benefits, then we need to sit in a room, or we need to have a piece of paper that says, this is what we were asked to do. This is what we're being asked to do now. What is the impact of that? And again, in simple terms, everybody was happy with that. Again, though, it's cultural. People who were wanting to work in a more agile way didn't want to be slowed down. So that change also, and we see this this wasn't a particularly IT heavy environment, although there was some of that. But when you get to more IT centric organizations, particularly when there's a lot of features development rather than more traditional looking projects, that distinction around what is fit for purpose scope management can be quite tricky. And even in this environment, it was quite tricky. And so the other thing we talked about a lot was having a continuous improvement mindset. And so, you know, covered on some of the things we did in practical terms to do that continuous improvement. But again, leaning into that cultural change, the idea here was we didn't want to let perfection interrupt progress. So we change something, we might not get it right. Let's try it again next month. It's not like we're going to change the process and then it's locked in place forever. We can learn, we can evolve. We all need to be happy, both as a leadership team and as a delivery team, that what we're doing here is fit for purpose, is going to lead to better outcomes and ultimately better project results. Excuse me. So post-project benefits and tracking, again, was a beast of a thing to wrangle with. In this organization, they were quite geographically dispersed. And when the project was handed over to an operational team, the operational section leads and project sponsors to some degree had never really been asked to continued tracking or measuring benefits when the project was in operation. So they were some interesting questions as well. And sometimes we get the operational owner of the asset or the system saying, well, I wasn't responsible for what was in the business case. So why will I track this? And sometimes they were very enthusiastic, but they genuinely put their hands up in the air and said, well, how am I going to track this? And again, because the benefits were so poorly defined, that was a bit of a struggle. So again, that's become much, much better since those business cases have been clearer. Project sponsors, again, very variable in terms of understanding their role in the benefits process. Some sponsors were clear about their role, but again, felt like the tools available to them weren't good enough. Some sponsors said, oh, I thought that's what the project manager was for, or that's what the operational manager was for. So continual uplift of skills around sponsorship was probably another piece that we've done. Formally for us, we did do a sponsor education piece, but that did come a bit later. And I would say that has improved, but it's still a work in process. It's not to be critical of sponsors or senior leaders. They're often at the top of their game in terms of their own discipline, but we expect people with no project management experience to be great sponsors, and often they're not. So we did find a gap in sponsor knowledge there as well. I'd say commitment to progress over perfection, and everybody at every level leaning into the fact that this isn't a process change, this isn't a capability uplift, this isn't just about happy clappy culture. This is a fundamental shift to the way we do projects. And again, that like all culture change, that doesn't happen overnight. That can take years, and we've been witness to that. But these guys are now in a really good spot where they're not perfect, and sometimes you get close to perfect, and there's an organizational restructure or a key person leaves, and to their credit, they've overcome all of those challenges that they've come up, and they're pushing forward, and it runs like a different organization while still not perfect. It's quite slick now in terms of what they're getting with their benefits, in terms of measurable and transparent outcomes. So our top tips for benefits success. Number one, and I think this goes for pretty much everything we do, to be honest, engage stakeholders. This engagement would not have succeeded, and we wouldn't all be friends today if we hadn't have had representation. You don't necessarily have to have everybody, but representation from all of the key stakeholders, finance, HR, marketing, strategy, delivery, operations. We had a person from all of those teams at the table. Now, the ones that weren't key stakeholders dropped away after the initial kind of set up and kick-off meeting. But what was good was that they knew about it, and they agreed that it was the right thing to do. And so we had champions within the business that, even though they weren't directly engaged, they were very supportive of what we were trying to do, which over the long term really ended up being quite helpful, because whilst they weren't key stakeholders of projects or every project, and they weren't key stakeholders of our engagement, over time projects touched everybody in the business. So that was very helpful. To build a dedicated team. So that kind of talks to number one in terms of a dedicated team from the business, but also in our team, we'd put in there a dedicated benefits manager, and he had a full-time job just talking benefits. And half of his role was comms and change management, and half of his time was analytical, tracking the facts and figures, doing the surveys, getting the metrics. Where you couldn't get the metrics, going back to the strategy team. What did you mean by this? Or what was this based on? So it was a really interesting role, actually, very much half left brain, half right brain. Be the champion for benefits, tell people why benefits is important, and then get the data to build it up. Number three, adopt a structured framework. I haven't really talked about that. I mean, we could do a case study on its own about frameworks. It is very important to have an agreed structured framework. There are a couple of very good ones that have been adopted by the state governments. New South Wales state government benefits framework is excellent. Victoria also have a very strong framework. They're both quite different, and the Victorian one is more structured to larger, more complex capital works, whereas the New South Wales one is a bit more flexible. But they've both got their strengths. They're all freely available. Benefits frameworks as a whole are really popular in Australia more than anywhere else in the world. The public sector in the UK has some. Haven't been able to find anything out of the US. So we're at the top of our game in terms of frameworks. And whether you, wanted to get in a company like ours to develop one, or whether you want to use what's available, I would always recommend the use of a structured framework. Closely followed by number 4, customize the framework. If it doesn't work for you, change it. I've never come across a framework, template, methodology, any kind of body of knowledge doesn't need to be adapted for the specific organization. Every company that we work with and have worked with over the last 15 years will say, we're different. And to some degree, every company, every context is different. There's a lot of commonality, but you always benefit from tweaking the framework. As part of the framework, there should be a register. If there isn't a register, make a register. It should always, you would always want to, it's really important to be able to track. So develop a benefits register, make it a Bible, put it in a shared location, use it as part of status updates, as steer codes, make sure people know where to go if they want to know how a benefit is. Utilize metrics and KPIs. One of the really good things that this team did to help get the leadership team on board is that when they were in a place where the benefits were well defined, they tied the realization of benefits to leadership KPIs. Now that's it's still evolving in terms of is that a good measure? It's getting better, but it really put the leadership team on the hook for making sure those projects succeeded. But you can only really do it when you've got the data to support it. And that comes on to the next one, which is, of course, robust monitoring. As I said, my preference for monitoring and benefits is every time we monitor a project, we should be also talking about those benefits. So definitely at each stage gate. And usually at a monthly status report, if there is no change to the project, then you would assume there's no change to the benefits. But at the first mention of a change of scope or an increase in budget or an issue, I would always tend to ask the question, what's the impact on the benefits? And I would expect the project manager to know. Next one is provide regular training. This stuff won't stick unless you continually, and when I say continually, in the early days of this engagement, we were having weekly conversations. When you get to a steady state or some degree of maturity, it can be 6 monthly or quarterly, whatever works for your organization. You don't have to ram it down people's throat if they are mostly doing the right thing. But if you don't revisit why we're doing it, why it's important, what we get out of it as a business, behaviors will revert back. 9, communicate effectively. I think for me, that's in the same basket a little bit as training, but highlighting when you've done a good job, it's probably one of the most important things that we don't see often enough. When benefits are realized, sometimes you'll get more than you planned for, celebrate it, put it in the newsletter, give the project manager a shout out, or the sponsor or the operational manager, whoever. Make that a good news story, because it's incredibly rare, actually, that benefits that were stated in the business case come out the other end unscathed, particularly on a large or complex project. And then number 10, review and adapt. Particularly in the early stages of this engagement, we did a lot of review and adapt. One of the things that we reviewed and adapted the most was for the different types of projects. So I've talked about some of the more agile projects, even some of the traditional big clunky waterfall style projects. They knew that they should be doing change impact assessment, but they weren't doing it. So when we asked them why they weren't doing it, the forms were too big or they didn't know where the forms were. So then there's a piece of work then to go and fix that gap, communicate the gap, give them another chance at the next stage gate. So continual review and adapt until the process is working. And as I say, something will change and you'll need to go back and review and adapt again. So the key thing for me, that benefits is not an event, it's a process, and it's a process that needs continuous work. We see very, very few organizations really excel in this space. So it is a passion of mine. And when we see good practice, we really like to wave the flag for it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second. I'm keen to understand, has anything I've said today resonated with any of you? And really, if you'd be happy to share with us, what are the challenges that you're seeing with benefits and value management realization in your organization? Because I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing that they're not alone in certain areas. So Daniela, can you take people out of Teams jail? Could you please confirm how the governance for benefit realization was covered? In steerco meetings, there was always a panel on the dashboard report for impact on benefits this month, and it was very much in the stage gate pack as well. So every time a project, say that a project went from planning into implementation, reaffirm the benefits, reaffirm the plan for measurement, and off they went until the next gate. At one stage, they probably made that a bit tight in terms of, can you report this every month? That got a little bit wound back, and it went back to only reporting the impact on benefits if there was a change. So again, we did this kind of fit for purpose back and forth through the process to try not to create too much of an admin burden on PMs, but to make sure that there was a confidence around whether benefits would be realised. Are there any other questions, or would anybody else like to share any challenges, and we can take you off? We can take you off. I think we can take you off your. Can we, Danielle? Oh yeah. Oh, it looks like everybody's muted. Okay. Yeah, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak or take your camera off. Please feel free to. Keen to hear if anybody's got any specific challenges at the moment around benefits that they'd like to share with the group. You're in a safe space. Vic, you've been around the block. Would you like to share anything that you've learned across the last couple of organisations you've been in? I don't think people can share, Daniel. Oh, here we go.
Sorry, Louise, did you ask me?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you repeat that question, sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any observations around challenges with benefits that you see from organisation to organisation, and how have you resolved that?
Yeah, I think when recently with organization changes, especially when organization is struggling with the business coming in and the transformation that they're going through, and redefining the priorities, the organization priority, and then at the same time managing the customer expectations, and that's where the governance process and that's the challenges actually I see there. Somehow we're fighting with the priorities over the capacity management versus the organization vision that they want to achieve with the geographical changes happening and several other changes environmental that's happening now. So that's the current challenge I'm actually seeing there.
Yeah, thanks Vic. Has anybody had any wins in this space that they'd like to share? The case study I'm sharing is really working with an organisation over probably almost 4 years, probably almost 5 years now. So it's been a very long-term process it is pretty good at this point, but it's taken an awfully long time. And that first year, I'm not sure we actually achieved. Not sure we achieved anything really in terms of improved benefits, but we did get everybody on the same page, understanding the need, understanding the gaps, and putting some things in place for the longer term. But it was probably a year before we felt like we were making any real progress. Any other comments or thoughts? Seeing lots of names that I know we've definitely got some stories on this. Mikhail, thanks. What's the level of baseline data that will be useful? I've seen many sponsors struggling to articulate benefits, especially the expected level of improvement, because they lack operational data points for the current state. Yeah, what's the level of, just go back to the first line, what's the level of baseline data that will be useful? Yeah, that's the question. Well, we know what the level of baseline data is that will be useful. Firstly, we need clearly articulated benefits. Then we need to really understand what the value should be that comes from those benefits. And then before we start, we really need to understand what the metrics will be for measurement. So if it's, let's take an easy example, will it be cost savings? If so, how much will we save over which period of time? And when will we start to save it? That's kind of the most basic example that I can think of. Unless that's articulated straight, like right at the beginning of the project, before the project starts, it can be very difficult to get that back. We have tried to retrofit some benefits in times gone by. So you'll go to a business case, it's not super well articulated, but you kind of know what they mean, and you kind of can extrapolate how they were going to measure it. But it's finger in the air largely. It can be okay, but it's never as good if you don't have those expectations articulated in the business case. And a racy and accountable and responsible person who's going to do that tracking activity every month and then post project. So what's the level of baseline data? The level of data doesn't need to be huge, but it has to be clear. That's probably my view on that. If it's just, could just be cost, could just be customer satisfaction, could just be CO2 reduction, doesn't need to be comprehensive. It depends what it is that the outputs we want are, but it has to be clearly articulated. And what's challenges for us as delivery people is that we may or may not be involved in those conversations at business case level. So we rely often on other people doing that part for us. So yeah, it's nice when we get involved, but we don't always get involved. It's nice when the PMO is involved. We see a lot of organizations where neither the PMO or the delivery teams have a seat at that table. It can be done by asset managers, it can be done by strategy teams. And as in this case, there was no real link between the two. There were people who waved at each other across the hallway, different officers, just didn't think of each other as being on the same team, which was one of the problems. So yeah, great question. Thanks, Mikhail. Any other thoughts or comments?
Maybe I just have a question about how to manage benefits in agile environments. So it's a lot of buzz about AI, and it's very fast moving, and people just really try to stay away with heavy documentation and processes at the moment. And it's hard to even to keep even simple documentation now, because people think it's a burden, it's too much, etc. Yeah. So how to enforce the extra layer on benefits in agile environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nat. And again, something we've worked through recently with another customer, actually. It's not a popular answer, but it has to be documented, it has to be defined, it has to be documented, and it has to be tracked. The one thing I would say, or two things I'd say about agile environments are, first of all, you have to be really careful to keep it fit for purpose. So as much as it can be tempting to extract all of the information that we want, We have to get just what we need. And that should align beautifully with an incremental realization of benefits. Because if we're working on an agile way, we don't need to wait 3 months, 6 months, 2 years to get the benefits. We should have the benefits at the end of the next sprint or the next iteration. So therefore, we don't need as much in terms of tracking, or theoretically at least, but we do need something. We can't do it with a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen. So yes, it's difficult, but it's an absolute non-negotiable. And that's one of the challenges that we often have, not just with benefits, but working with agile teams more generally. We don't do that. We're agile. And unless you have the support of the leadership team to say, well, you can be agile, but nowhere in any agile methodology or book does it say you don't need to do these monitoring and controlling activities as well. They are a necessity. Vic, I'll read Zoe's question and then I'll throw to you, Vic. Does that answer your question, Nat?
No, yes, I do get a pushback sometimes from vendors that run the sprints, etc. That it's too heavy, documentation is too heavy. Why do we do this? We agile, so it's definitely a challenge.
Well, vendors should be easy because you should be putting it in their contracts, and they don't get paid unless you do what they ask you to do. I know that's easy for me to say, but there's ways and means with vendors that we don't have with internal teams. So vendors will always push back and try and take the path of least resistance. Zoe, the defining of benefits and the measurements is the responsibility. Is this the responsibility for the project manager or the sponsor, or is this something that all stakeholders should contribute to? Again, another great question. I've never seen one way of doing this. So as I say, sometimes if you are lucky enough to be an early stage project manager, it could be something that you define. Sometimes it happens in asset management or strategy teams. Ideally, it's done as a group. So if you are the delivery person who's responsible for running the project, it's really, even if writing that business case isn't your responsibility, it's really very helpful to be involved in that business case writing process. So that would be my preference, to have key stakeholders involved in the business case. Sometimes, though, we get what we get, particularly when a project comes over the fence into a delivery team, and then it's our job to run with it. So it can happen many different ways. But yeah, my preference is to be involved as early as we can. Vic?
Yeah, sorry, Lucy. Yeah, so the question you asked earlier, I was just thinking about it. So, and relating to what you presented, especially with your listing ownership confusion, right? So the key challenges I would say in practice is the ownership of the benefits once it's delivered. In your opinion, obviously, who should be actually owning it? I would suggest the receiving, or it's just the business or the sponsor.
Again, I don't think there's one answer, Vic. I think it's the person who's appropriate to do the ongoing measurement. And that's very rarely the project sponsor, unless the sponsor has responsibility for the operational area as well.
Okay, so that's the challenge, I would say. I would have seen that the handing over the ownership of that benefit. So that's the challenge I wanted to share. Yeah.
Very much so, yeah. Sorry, Nat, did you have another comment to make?
Oh, yeah, sorry, just a question. So would you write down the benefits for each project? But if you have a program or portfolio level, would you keep a centralized location for the benefits so that you can see the whole picture, and maybe eliminate some projects because there's duplication or something like that? So would you
absolutely absolutely. I think benefits, it's not everybody kind of thinks about benefits as being project level. They are more usually thought of as being a program level. My view is that all projects are an investment, and as an investment, it needs to have a benefit. But on programs, when you are delivering multiple related initiatives, absolutely a centralized benefits register. And also, I think there's a role for the EPMO team, portfolio management office, to be right across those portfolio benefits, because it's very common that you get two projects working on the same output, because it's a pain point for the organization. So yeah, great point, Nat. Yeah, it's super important to monitor project, program, portfolio level. I don't think there's too much thing as a overkill in a fit for purpose way, of course. But the only reason we do projects or programs is for benefits. We don't do them for any other reason. So if we can't invest the right amount of effort in that, then we're essentially saying that we're happy to create waste. All right, just want to flick back to my slides before I forget. I've got some reading materials in there for anybody else, anybody who would like to read more on this topic. The PMI guide is quite good, Benefits Realisation Management. Also quite good is the Management of Portfolios book, which is the People Cert reference. Steve Jenner's book's probably the industry standard reference on this stuff, certainly as far as I'm concerned. He's done some fantastic stuff on this, and I encourage you to look him up more broadly because he's done lots of webinars and very knowledgeable on the benefits topic. And there's a couple of other things there that you can take a look at on our website if and when you feel the need. A couple of things that we've got coming up. On the topic of benefits, we are doing a half-day workshop at the end of July. Be a very practical session where what we're actually trying to get out of it is for participants to take back a roadmap back to their office to say, how are we going to get from A to B with benefits? So it will involve a bit of theory, a lot of peer-to-peer workshopping, and as I say, hopefully an output to take back. We have launched our our PMO toolbox for our AI toolbox for PMO teams, I should say, today. There is a whole section on benefits in value in there. So we've got in total over 120 prompts and use cases. And yeah, if you'd like a free sample of that, send us an email because we've got a sampler, which is fantastic. But yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff on benefits in there. And then last thing from me, we are doing our 10th PMO Leadership Symposium in Brisbane in September. We've just announced, we've just confirmed rather, our keynote speaker will be from Transport and Main Roads. So that's very exciting. We'll be supported by Monday and Zoho on that one. We haven't launched it yet, but we're going to get that one officially launched. It is on the website, I think, but we will be finalising the agenda and officially launching that in the next probably 2 weeks. So happy to take any final questions. Thanks for your attention and your contributions. Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks, folks. Don't hesitate